Make sure. Check, check, mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check. Think I'm good. You guys can still hear me well? Especially because you take that seriously. You're going to take us that long. Okay. You guys can hear me well, man. Salute, salute. Like, share, subscribe. Tell a friend. Hit the like button right now if you can. That helps the channel the most. Salute to all my brothers that are in the Discord listening to this particular Make Mind Your Own Business discussion. This is something we do in the Discord. Most high willing every Sunday and or Monday. Just depends on when Love see or if I'm covering it. And so we go through different topics regarding business, small business ownership, starting a business, and then while you're in the business. So I think it's really important that we have these conversations outside of the normal everyday conversation that we have. I will say last week was much more productive, in my opinion, in terms of conversation. Even if we didn't get a solution, but I think we thoroughly understand the problem even more and more that starts to continue to plague us, you know. And one thing is money, finance, right? 2053, if that is truly on the brink, then, money, it's, our poverty level is going to be at the point of no return. And so the small businesses, right, if risky entrepreneurship is not as easy or as simple as people think it, right? But Love C said it best, and I tend to agree with this sentiment that I'd rather work 100 hours for myself than 50 hours for someone else, you know, and in due time, right? And that's just for me, but most people work, right? But I think a lot of businesses start through a side hustle and things of that nature. You know, you want to make sure you keep as much money as possible. A lot of times people are going out, starting a business on their own with their own money, taking the risks, you know. So I'm never going to tell somebody, hey, you have a bonus. Don't render that bonus, right? You've earned that bonus. You took all the risks. You were able to hire people, you know, provide other people with life altering changes, positive, you know? And so you should be able to generate as much income as your business is worth, you know? And so one thing I really wanted to talk about was margin and infrastructure. I think margins, people understand them but only kind of. And I think there's two specific, well, not that I think, the two specific type of margins that we have to understand is gross margin and then operating margin, right? Gross margin and then operating margin are the two margins in terms of business and entrepreneurship that we have to thoroughly understand. So salute to the people in the Discord. We got about 7 people in here so far. Salute to the 20 people that are on YouTube. I noticed there's a pop up, but this might be risky. You know, we usually don't go live on Sunday, but I wanted to bring my own business to the YouTube. So salute to the Discord, and I appreciate those people. Let me just start with like, share, subscribe, man. Tell a friend, hit that like button if you can. That helps the channel most. So margin and gross margin, right? Gross margin. I'm just gonna break it down because I want people to actually, if they actually are engaged in this type of information, then they'll write it down for themselves, right? So I can share my screen and I can do all that stuff. But I think that my part is to engage in this way, and then hopefully you guys are able to write it down, so to speak. You know, if you care or I'm sharing any information that you don't already know. I would assume that everybody's who's trying to start a business and etc. Understands margins. So just in case, I think it's very important. So gross margin is the money that you keep after you deduct expenses, the cost that it takes to actually get the job done. So as an example, right? Gross margin. Here's what would go into my expenses. So if I dispatch 2 guys on a job at $20 an hour, right? That those I would deduct from my gross margin. So that's $40 per hour, right? Let's say I take a shrink wrap roll on 2 rolls of tape. That cost me $15, right? So I got the 40 because each guy is 20, and then I have my supplies that are average about $15 every time I do a 2-person job. Then I have a truck. On average, when you look at the truck costs for that job, you have fuel, basically tolls, gas, stuff like that, right? So then let's say my cost is $100, right? Just giving some round numbers. So $40 basically per hour for the guy, $15 for supplies for that job, and then my truck is $100 for the day, right? So if I take that as 155, that's the cost it takes to actually do the job that day, right? So now 155 are my costs, right? To do the job that specific day, right? Let's say I'm charging a rate of $50 per guy per hour, right? So I'm generating $150, and or excuse me, $100, and I have a travel fee of $150, right? So now I have my travel fee, so it'll cover my supplies and the truck. I have a little bit left over, and let's say I have the $50 an hour, and my guys work 4 hours, right? So that's what's how much is that? $400 plus the 150. So I have 550, right? And then my costs for that job are the 100 plus the 15. So 115 and then 40 times four. What's that? 40 times four. And then, so this is, remember what we're about to calculate is gross margin, right? Gross margin. So you got the 160. I got the 40 times four. 40 times four, so 160, and my costs are plus 115. Right? So my costs for this job are $275, right? I've charged and generated, right, from my travel fee and my hourly rate I charge for my guys 550. So I take the 275, I divide it by 550, right? And you can actually do it much more simply. You can literally just ask us for $100. But my margin for this work is 50%. Now, 50% is a great margin. Things that are sold at a 50% margin are like alcohol, 50, 60%. So basically, my gross margin shows me that after all my expenses, I'm keeping 50% of this money. That's a great margin. All right. That is a great margin to have for gross margin. Remember, gross margin are the costs that go directly into getting the work done on a specific day or a specific project. So it's generally people, cost for supplies, cost for transportation, right? Those things will go right into the job that day will be your gross margin, right? Now your operating margin is always going to be lower. If you have a 50% gross margin, you're doing well. 30% gross margin isn't bad. 35% is about average. Now, when you go into operating margin, now here's what you have. You have salaries that go into that. You have overhead expenses. So if you have a office, you know, maybe you have to, like, you have QuickBooks account, let's say, right, which is 50 or $60. You know, if you have to pay for insurances like liability, workman's comp, whatever the case is. So those overhead expenses, coupled with the expenses to get the actual work done, will now be your operating margin, right? A good operating margin is anywhere between 15% to like 25%. You're doing very well, very well. With our small businesses, a lot of times, hopefully, our operating margin is closer to our gross margin, but we still have the small expenses, you know. But a lot of times it's sole proprietorship, one person, single person LLC. So we usually don't have as many expenses, and insurance is really a hit on operating why operating margin is so low, you know. But when you're looking at your operating margin, now you all the costs of doing business. So from insurance, the different programs you use, whether it be accounting softwares and etc. Any insurances you have, right? Affleck, all those things go into your operating margin. So if you had to aim for it, and you want to aim high, right? 20% operating margin is pretty damn good. 40% gross margin is pretty damn good. Ours are probably a little bit closer just because our overhead shouldn't be as high. depending on. We try to mitigate by having home offices. If you have a garage, people tend to keep their supplies there. You know, I have a couple different storage units around the city, just so when I dispatch, I can keep my uh, expenses a little bit sharper. If I dispatch my guys an hour away all the time, and I'm trying to eat into my potential gross profits just because fuel and renting and things of that nature. But gross margin and operating margin are key, right? Thank you, homeboy, for dropping them in the chat, right? So gross margin again, I gotta pay my guys to do the work. I gotta get the truck there with fuel, and I gotta bring supplies. I deduct all those expenses from my hourly rate and whatever my charges are for supplies in the truck, and then that gives me my gross margin, the percentage that I get to keep. Once I got that money in hand, now I gotta look at, okay, how much does QuickBooks cost? How much does the storage units cost me? How much does the office cost me? How much does insurance cost me? Now, once I take all that out, now I'm at an operating margin. Operating margin 20%, gross margin 40%, you're doing well. You're doing well. So how do you come up with your rates, right? Your rates are key. Take your take your expenses to get the job done. Take your expenses to get the job done, right? And then you want to make sure that you have at least a 40% margin. So this, as people, it's hard for people to formulate rates, right? So basically, if a job takes you, let's say it costs you $100 to get the product there or to produce the service, right? When you're paying people, you got to get transportation, you have to get supplies, right? So if that be the case, then for that particular product, I'm going to charge $140, right? Because I want to make sure my margins are about 40%. So take your expenses to get the work done, and then build your cost, your rate, your flat rate, whatever the case is, your hourly rate from there. Cover your gross expenses, right, in terms of gross margin. And I think that's the best way to come up with your rate, because people will just say, "Oh, I think this costs about X," you know, and then we don't actually know what our time is worth, you know, and a lot of that is kind of trial and error. If you've been in business a long time, then you start to kind of understand what your time is worth to you. You know, as you start kind of playing in the market, moving your rates around, giving discounts, see where you do and don't have to discount. So I think that starting with your expenses to get the work done, and then framing your rate around a 40% gross margin. So after every $100 you spend, you make $40 essentially. Yeah, yeah. You want to get 40%, right? You want to get 40%. So if I keep out of every $10 essentially, how do I say it? Like every $10, my profit is $4, right? After I pay everybody, after I do everything, my profit is $4. That's what I'm trying to aim for. My profit being $4 at once I pay my guys, and I pay off the truck, and I pay for the fuel and etc. Right? My profit is $4 at that point, right? The gross margin, because obviously the higher your gross margin is, your operating margin is going to be higher. But there's so many expenses that we have to account for in the operating margin, right? So focus on that gross margin when you're building your rate. I think it'll help simplify how you get to a rate in which you can, what you should charge a client when you're first starting off. Now, once you gain clout in any arena, so like for me, DJing, when I moved to DC initially, I DJ for free. I would send an email or Instagram and say, "Hey, I'm DJing HAMP the Stampede. I'm good at this. I'll come and DJ at your place for no cost. If you appreciate my talent, then we'll converse from there." Right? And a lot of times I would gauge it on their response to, while doing my market research with other DJs in the area, how much they were charging, looking at the different clubs and etc. And it's just a matter of making an inquiry, right? You call the companies that do the work you do in your area, you know. So you hit a DJ up, hey, how much you charge for an hour for this? How much you charge an hour for the club? How much you charge an hour for a baby shower? And then you get, I would get 10 rates just to try to formulate, and then I would go listen to those DJs too, and I realized, okay, I'm better than this person. This person's good, whatever the case is. So I started to see what was the acceptable rate for the club, as opposed to a baby shower, as opposed to a wedding. You know, so gross margin, the expenses, you remove the expenses that it costs to do the job, right? So again, if I do moving, supplies, people, truck, take those out, whatever's left over is my gross margin. End of the month, I got all my profits, right, from the 40% gross margin. Now I remove my overhead costs, i.e., the building, uh, the software that I use, insurance. Now I deduct that and see what my percentages is left over is my operating margin. If you have an operating margin of 20% and a gross margin of 40%, doing good. All right. Margins are key. Protect your margins, you protect your business. Protect your margins, you protect your business. Everything you do, you should be aiming to hit that margin. So I don't care if it's a 2 hour job, I'm trying to keep 40% of that money. Right? I'm trying to make 40%. So after I pay everybody, right? I should have at least if I pay everybody, I should have 40% of what I charge. Protect your margin, protect your business. All right. After it's all said and done, I should have 40% of what I charge after I pay everybody. I deduct from my supplies and my truck. I should have 40% of what I charge. All right. I should have 40% left over. Operating margin, once I take away all my overhead costs, my building, my again, I'm just repeating this so we understand. My subscriptions to different accounting software, now my operating margin may be around 20%. Good. That's operating margin. That's good. Okay. So those two things really, really matter in terms of a small business. Protect your margin. Protect your margin. Protect your margin. Infrastructure, and this is probably it's a conversation unto itself, but I just want to touch on it a little bit more, right? We are good at marketing. We got people that'll support us, but a lot of us are service industry based, and you see this happen a lot with restaurants. People aren't accounting for everything. So many clubs I DJ that were black owned, they'll go in there and they'll be like, "Oh, I gotta run to the store to get ice. I have to run to the store to get liquor. I have to run to the store to get this." But if you're running a business and paying retail rates, you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? Because people are looking at daily profits, right? But they're not so much looking at they're not protecting their margin. And so, yeah, I can get a bottle of Hennessy from the store I can get a liter for what, $80? But if I would have wholesale that, I get that same liter for $40, right? And people already don't care about your business as much as you do. So what happened? I remember I was talking to my guys. I was like, yo, every time y'all leave out, y'all lose a roll of tape. One of the dudes say, hey, it's only the roll of tape only $3. So I said, do we do a job every day? He's like, almost. So what, 5 days a week? Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So do $3, right? We're not even the taxes. $3 times 5 times 52. So yeah, you'll give me the $3, right? But can you give me the money that equates to 3 times 5 times 52? And this is the thing that we kind of just dismiss. Oh, an $80 bottle of Henny, I'm selling shots for $12. I'll get that money back. But how much money did you lose? And we're never accounting for our inventory of days too, right? Because we're not properly formulating our infrastructure. A lot of us and what we do, inventory is not just the things we sell, but the days that we have to sell them. So if you're in the service industry, you provide a service, right? A day lost is inventory that you had to throw out. So I do moving, people do cleaning services, right? The less days, so if you have a 30 calendar day and you're not cleaning every 30, you're not cleaning every day, you have to count those days as inventory loss too. But we're not thinking like that, right? The club will have a great Friday and Saturday, right? But you got to keep the fridge running 7 days, right? And these are things that we're not accounting for. So we're thinking, oh, $40, $30, $5, $3 is nothing. So who? So why? And then when you put the exponent on it, now you realize, oh, I'm losing a lot more money over the course of a day, week, months, and years. It's very important that we put things in place. Where are you getting your product from? Where are you getting the things you need to be successful from? You know, the people in which you hire, what's their allocations? What are their real expectations? In busy times, in slow times, how do you survive? What can you mitigate? What can you take off the menu? What can you discount to leverage more business? Right? What can get you in the door so you can upsell? Are you prepared for a large influx? What is your contingency plan? How do you get people to the job? How do you get people from the job? How do you properly fuel? You know, there's so many things that we aren't thinking about. The logistics get lost, right? Which is why logistics people usually get paid a decent amount. You know, shout out to Mike Brown. He's on YouTube. He's saying working days in the car business have to stay in track. But if they go by and not sell something, now you have to double what you should have done. Every day matters. Yep, 100%, man, 100%. You know, and I think we are a little bit casual with the time. You know, not understanding we've lost inventory because days are inventory, right? And Mike's saying he sells them. So selling services, restaurant, car sale, cleaning, moving, days are inventory, right? You don't move anything, you don't sell anything that day, that's a hell. Look at inventory as days, and now you have to max them up. But make sure you have everything in place. Where do you get your product from? Where do you get your marketing materials from? What is delivery? What is your delivery schedule, right? Where are you getting the food from? The whole 9 yards. Who's the cheapest vendor within the vicinity if things hit the fan? Right? If you have a busy day because you did your calculations, but it may have been off, you might got a big party coming in if you own a restaurant. Now they eat you out of house and home, right? What's your short term? What's your short term mitigation? You know, we have to put these things in place in your business plan because these things happen. When we get a call from a client, we do same day service. But what the same day service actually look like? It looks like me going to do the job, me going to hang the TV. 24-hour turnaround, we can do it, right? But we have a fee for it, right? It's an inconvenience fee. Most people understand this. If you call me the day of, it's going to be more, right? If you call me and I got to come out in 24 hours, it's going to be more, you know? And I think that we all need to make sure we be mindful of building those things in while not being greedy, you know? But it does take more time. It does take more time to coordinate things last minute for business, getting people out there, coordinating, you know, whatever it is that you do. So these things should be a part of your plan, you know, if you're doing someone a service, right? Like a favor on, you know, because we're always thinking about protecting our margins and our infrastructure for account as many things as possible. And then that infrastructure, the business plan, right? The game plan, the protocols should have a level of fluidity to them because you're learning, you're doing as you grow, right? Opportunities come, things slow down, right? You may have to do things differently depending on the time you're in. So the infrastructure is really, really important to a business, you know. Um, and logistics covers a lot of things. Who's coming to deliver? When are they coming to deliver? Can they get you stuff last minute, right? Because we're picking different vendors. Oftentimes we just kind of go with people because we don't know enough, you know. And to do your due diligence is difficult, right? Due diligence means that if there's 100 people who deliver cleaning supplies, I have to get estimates from at least 50 for it to be technically due diligence, right? So very unlikely that we're going to get all of those, but just think about due diligence in that way. But at the very least, vet people, compare, put people against each other to see who's going to give you the best option. And the best option doesn't mean the cheapest, but it's about the service rendered. You know, can they get to you with that inconvenience fee? Are they willing to go on a limb, do you a favor? You know, throw you something extra. Oh, just keep that. It's good. You know, you really need good partnerships to be successful. And oftentimes we don't have those because in our infrastructure, our game plan, we aren't accounting for everything. We're just looking at the dollar for dollar growth, but you need to have contingency and understanding for as you grow, how you implement, who's going to do this work for you, what do they get paid, how do they get to the job, what's that person's background, right? What is the mitigating factors for employees, right? See, on my business, I can mitigate. I can go do any of the jobs. I can do all the work that we do, right? I can pack, move, unpack. I can disassemble, reassemble. I can hang TVs, right? I can go do the sales calls, talk to the clients. I can do over the road, doesn't matter. So for me and my business, it's a convenience factor. I can do it. You know, are we all in industries in which I can literally do all the jobs? So you got to be very cerebral in your hiring and everything because this is a part of your infrastructure, right? Generally speaking, the rate you pay slightly qualifies the level of work that you get. So we just want to be very cognizant of those. You know, we love giving our people, we love giving people a chance. But what's the fallout, right? What's the potential drawback? You know, like I got one guy, and, he he has custody of his kids, but it's just him, right? So kids get sick, he can't work, he can't show up. What does that look like? He's a great worker. So what's the risk reward, right? What's the ROI, right? So just make sure that you understand your infrastructure and its logistics, its people, its time, its options, contingencies. How do you mitigate risk? How do you mitigate loss? You know, how do you maximize potential opportunities? Are you able to based on your crew size, based on your capacity? What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to stop and start? There's so much that goes into it. Just make sure you properly situate your infrastructure. You know, so all those things are key. But that's really all I had today. And we can have more in-depth conversation about infrastructure. But I wanted to mention it just because our margins have a lot to do with how we're structured. You know, how much money you make and has a lot to do with what you have in place to maximize your profits, to maximize your potential and opportunity. You know, so salute to the 30 people on YouTube. I just fired it up on YouTube. So I'm looking over here because I'm looking at my screen for the Discord. So just talking about that. And, so I said, let me just fire it up on YouTube at least. Of course, my brother Daly comes through with the $2 shit like that. Super chat said, mind your own business on Sunday. It's dope. And my brother Darius gifted 5 to the Mighty Risky membership. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm gonna hit my man Fo up, man. Once the kids go to sleep, we might rock out with some music or something just for the sofa holiday and all that. I know everybody coming home, vibing, eating with their people. Maybe we can give them a free DJ set as they party because nobody gotta work tomorrow and all that, you know. But I don't know if anybody wanted to come up in the Discord. Like, so I appreciate you, brother. If y'all wanted to add anything or have any questions, if not, it's a good 45 minutes, or 30 minutes for sure. So that's generally how long we hold the meeting. Again, we will be supporting Sean's project. We have a dope way to how to put the monies in. So once we get all that set in stone, we'll release that daily. We'll get the information and etc. Yeah, man. All good, all good. If you're in DC next weekend, come through to the cookout. If you can make it, biggest cookout in Washington DC of the year. Should be dope. Everybody in the Discord, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Everybody on YouTube, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Be safe. Be right there. Like, share, subscribe. Tell a friend, tell a friend, and we
Closed-minded folks, you know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it, but it's like this, the South got something to say. That's all I got to say.